America in 2025 is like a three-story apartment building. Upper class. The wealthy, income and assets increase, remaining unaffected by economic fluctuations such as house prices, rent, or inflation. Middle class. The middle class, seemingly stable, but incomes can no longer keep pace with the cost of living. Housing prices, rent, and bills are constantly rising. Finally, there's the ground floor. Low-income earners, where RVs, tents, and old cars have literally become home. And what makes this painting even more terrifying is that the ground floor is swelling at a record pace. The once crowded streets are now lined with rows of old RVs. Parking lots have become temporary residential areas. Neighborhoods are deserted, as if abandoned. Homelessness is no longer a personal problem. It is reshaping the face of entire cities, turning many American urban areas into empty ghost towns. In today's video, we'll delve into the phenomenon turning America into a ghost town. From RV parks sprawling across cities to empty streets, and why the world's wealthiest nation is allowing millions of its citizens to fall into the deepest poverty. There's a paradox unfolding in the heart of America in 2025. Millions of people are still working 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, yet they face the risk of sleeping in their cars. What was once considered a rare story is now a common reality, especially toward the end of the month, when paychecks and living expenses starkly reveal the gap between labor and the ability to survive. What makes this paradox even more cruel is that it appears at a time when economic indicators still seem healthy. Growth remains steady. The official poverty rate hovers around 10–11%, and median household income exceeds $80,000 per year. However, alongside this bright picture, the United States recorded approximately 770,000 homeless people in a single night of statistics, the highest number ever, an increase of over 18% compared to the previous year. Even full-time workers are not immune to this cycle, partly because the working poor still exist in the current economy. Those who have full-time jobs but whose income is not enough to lift them above the precarious threshold of instability. It was in this context that RVs appeared across cities as a sign of a quiet shift in American life. From symbols of freedom and exciting road trips, RVs are becoming the reluctant refuge of those priced out of the housing market. It is estimated that around 486,000 people currently live full-time in RVs, a number that has nearly doubled in just a few years and primarily comes from low to middle income groups who were once part of the stable middle class. The clearest manifestation is in Los Angeles. This county has over 75,000 homeless people and more than 14,000 vehicles used as residences, more than the number of tents or other temporary shelters. The rows of RVs stretching along Venice Boulevard or under the Freeway 101 overpasses form parallel streets running alongside the official city, reflecting the juxtaposition of prosperity and precarity just a few feet apart. In the Midwest, the story portrays a different version of the same issue. In Michigan, the cost of renting a two-bedroom apartment in 2024 requires renters to earn approximately $24.50 per hour, while the minimum wage is only $12.50 per hour. Many families have to work over 70 hours a week, even taking on 2 to 3 extra jobs, and still can't afford to stay in the homes they've been attached to. This not only pushes them into a precarious situation, but also disrupts social connections as they are forced to leave their familiar communities. Housing research organizations point to a clear root cause. Rent prices have increased faster than wages for many years, while the supply of affordable housing has significantly declined. The Out of Reach 2024 report shows that renters need to earn an average of $32 per hour to afford a two-bedroom apartment, a significantly higher income than most American workers can achieve. But behind those numbers lies a more indescribable emotional upheaval, because people who fall into the RV lifestyle don't do so because they haven't tried. They did everything right that previous generations had advised. Work regularly, pay taxes, raise children, and pay off debts. And yet, in the end, they had to stop their cars in an empty parking lot and question the very values that were once considered the foundation of society. That's why RVs today are like a barometer of the state of America. Each vehicle turned into a home is a reminder that the housing system is cracking at its core. The proliferation of RV parks is no longer a fringe phenomenon. It's becoming a central mirror, reflecting the reality that housing costs have become unaffordable for too many people, no matter how hard they try. And as more and more people can no longer hold onto a fixed roof, the question becomes unavoidable. What broke the math of rent in modern America? The answer will be revealed in the next section. There's a truth that's gradually becoming clear beneath the prosperity that America often boasts about. The beautiful numbers in economic reports no longer align with the most basic math in life: paying rent. For many, this is perhaps the most difficult thing to accept. Because while the unemployment rate is reported to be low, the stock market is constantly hitting new highs, and macroeconomic reports are generally positive, millions of workers are finding themselves in a situation that almost no one could have imagined just a generation ago, working hard their entire lives but still not being able to afford a stable home. The traditional belief that simply having a full-time job is enough to avoid homelessness has been shaken in the past decade, partly because rent is increasing faster than income in most states. Reports from 2024 note that average rent has increased by over 24% in just 3 years, while hourly wages have remained almost stagnant. That distance pushes many people into an ironic situation: not poor enough to receive subsidies, but also not rich enough to live comfortably, a gray area in which an increasing number of families are trapped. This reality is very evident in every city. Phoenix, Arizona, once considered a livable city, has seen rental prices increase by 30–40% in just a few years. The usually peaceful working-class neighborhoods now see RVs parked overnight on the roadside, like temporary roofs squeezed between newly built residential areas. In what was once considered a symbol of affordable living, staying put has become a never-ending uphill battle. New York reveals another side of the crisis. Manhattan recorded an average rent of over $5,000 per month in 2024, the highest level ever seen. Even six-figure income families feel precarious, and for older workers who can no longer work overtime like before. That number is like a door that has been permanently closed. The city, once a paradise of opportunity, has become a place that many can only look at from afar. But the effects of rent prices don't stop at finances. It breaks the sense of belonging, something many people have built over decades. The neighborhoods that were home for a lifetime suddenly became too expensive to stay in. Each time we move further from the city center, we are separated from our community circle. The familiar church, the old grocery store, our favorite restaurant, the close-knit health clinic, and even the neighbors we've come to consider family. Rising rents not only take away a roof over your head, they also take away the feeling of having a place to return to. A factor that few people pay attention to, but is the hidden part of the iceberg. The United States is short more than 7 million affordable housing units. Limited supply creates an uneven competition among millions of people just to secure minimal housing. And when the market doesn't have enough housing, it starts to sort tenants by their ability to endure. Those who can't keep up with the rising prices will be pushed toward marginal options: used cars, trailers, weekly motels, places where just a small setback like job loss, illness, or rising fuel costs can send them straight into the abyss of homelessness. On the surface, this seems like the story of individual people. But when placed in the broader picture, it is precisely the silent force eroding the middle class, the group that was once the backbone of the American economy. When they can no longer survive in the cities that once fostered their prosperity, the vitality of the entire community also gradually fades. And as the math of rent becomes absurd for more and more people, the next question is inevitable. What has been and is happening to the very class that is the heartbeat of America? Section 3 will lead us to that answer. For decades, the middle class has been seen as the silent backbone keeping America standing. They are not the wealthiest people, but they are the ones who run the country with their own hard work. Skilled workers, drivers, teachers, nurses, office staff, small business owners. But by 2025, their image is fading, not because they've disappeared from society, but because life has pushed them out of their once very stable positions. The shrinking of this class did not happen overnight. It is the result of economic fluctuations that have accumulated over many years, simmering like cracks in a bridge that are only noticed when it collapses, revealing that it has been weak for a long time. The large-scale layoffs in the past 2 years were just a final straw, leaving many people unexpectedly off course from the familiar trajectory of a stable life. A person can work tirelessly for 10, 20, or 30 years, but a single email about layoffs can throw them into a spiral of uncertainty. Meanwhile, basic expenses, from rent, food, and fuel to insurance, are increasing faster than income. Families who were once self-sufficient and able to save each month now face the prospect of not being able to stay in their old communities. This departure isn't just happening on the map, but also psychologically. They're losing their connection to the place that nurtured their youth, losing their relationships with neighbors, and losing their sense of belonging to a familiar place. When they left, a part of the local economy disappeared with them. They used to be the shoppers at the corner store, eat breakfast at the family diner, get their cars fixed at the familiar garage, pay taxes, and keep the city running. When this class weakens, all activities around them also weaken. Many once bustling residential areas are becoming deserted. Small shops are closing down silently. Streets that were once warm with everyday life are becoming cold due to the loss of core residents. The silent disappearance of the middle class creates a domino effect on the pace of urban life. When they retreat into forced choices like RVs, rooms on the outskirts of the city, or more remote areas, the city loses the momentum it once had. Every aspect of life, from consumption and services to community engagement, weakens accordingly. And that effect becomes most apparent when we look at streets that were once bustling. The once brightly lit shopping centers are now sparsely populated. The bustling streets are now quiet, as if they have lost their own breath. What has made the urban heart feel so empty? There are mornings in many American cities when you step out onto the street and realize the silence isn't because everyone is still asleep, but because they've left. The once crowded avenues, where the sounds of life echoed with every beat, are now so sparse that only the sound of the wind whistling through the buildings remains. It's not hard to sense that cities are losing their economic soul, not because they are no longer large, but because they no longer have people to bring them to life. That emptiness began with the residents who were forced to leave the place they had once called home. As the cost of living skyrockets and rents become unaffordable, workers, the very lifeblood of the community, are forced to move away from the center. And as they left, the small shops, family diners, and traditional auto repair shops also gradually lost their regular customers. Once bustling shopping malls are now empty, not because no one wants to go, but because those who used to visit no longer live close enough to do so. Additionally, the popularity of remote work after the pandemic led thousands of employees to leave office buildings. The glass towers that were once brightly lit every night, symbols of urban economic activity, now have floors that are pitch black, as if the city has suddenly aged. As economic activity moves outside the downtown area, central neighborhoods, which are cultural, commercial, and social energy hubs, slow down in a way that is not easily recovered. And then, in those empty spaces, the homeless appeared more frequently, not because they chose those locations, but because they were once crowded areas with light, services, and a little safety. When roads that once belonged to the community become temporary shelters for the homeless, it creates a sense that the city is being abandoned in its most important core areas. That scene deepened the impression of an empty city, like a grand stage where the actors had left one by one, leaving only the props lying still somewhere. The city's already strained budget has to be stretched to cover emergency services, environmental cleanup, temporary assistance, and maintaining public safety. But as revenue declined with the drop in population and businesses closing, the quality of public services also decreased. And so, a downward spiral formed. Fewer residents led to less tax revenue. Less tax revenue resulted in fewer services, and fewer services made even more people want to leave. And that disruption ultimately created a profound sense of disorientation, as if the country were crossing a threshold for which no one had time to prepare. When a roof, once considered the clearest symbol of stability, begins to shake, people not only lose their physical footing, they lost their emotional support system. For many older Americans who have lived through decades where certainty was familiar, the housing market volatility felt like being pulled from the ground, forcing them to live in a state of limbo between worry and regret. Those who once belonged to a neighborhood, knew their neighbors, and attended church meetings now have to live in isolation in an RV or a car parked quietly on the outskirts of the city. The living space has shrunk to just a few square meters, but the loneliness has expanded more than ever. They weren't just moving, they were being separated from the society they were once an integral part of. Simultaneously, the decline of familiar neighborhoods delivers a more painful blow to the psyche. The places that were once the backdrop of memories, the old grocery store, the familiar street corner, the park where they took their children to play, now have a strange appearance. This feeling of loss isn't like leaving a place. It's like losing the version of America they once believed in, the one they placed all their hopes in. These fluctuations blur the lines between two forms of crisis, economic and identity. One can explain financial difficulties with inflation or rent, but it's harder to explain why they no longer feel like they belong in the very city that raised them for decades. When the feeling of not belonging spreads, it's not just a displacement of people, it's a displacement of the entire national spirit. Once the collective psyche falls into a state of division, between hope and despair, between trust and skepticism, the country itself also seems to split into two different realities. People not only live in different places, they are beginning to live in different versions of America. America is slowly but surely splitting into two parts. Those who are well off, those who have kept their good jobs, stable savings, or accumulated assets, continue to enjoy a high standard of living in the same city where thousands of others are struggling to afford rent. The division is no longer on economic charts or reports. It's visible on the streets themselves. One side enters the lobby of luxury apartment buildings, while the other lives right on the edge of the sidewalk, where the temperature changes daily and safety is a luxury. This separation isn't just economic. It occurs in living space, in how the two groups experience the same city. One side sees the world from the balconies of brand new apartments. The other sees the world through the frosted glass of a car window or the awning of an old tent. In the same corner of the street, yet carrying two different cultures, two different value systems, two different realities. When communities are no longer integrated, when classes that once interacted in schools, supermarkets, and parks now live separately, social cohesion is eroded day by day. Policies that should serve the entire population are unlikely to reconcile the needs of two increasingly divergent groups. One group demands an expansion of opportunities, the other just hopes to maintain a minimum standard of living. And it was that simmering conflict that widened the gap even further, like two landmasses moving in opposite directions. In many cities, this image creates a two-tiered picture. The upper level is brightly lit, radiating a sense of order and prosperity. The lower level is quiet, but crowded with those left behind, where temporary roofs, trash cans, and bus stops become signs of a different life. The city is still moving, but it's moving at two speeds, in two directions, with two different logics. And that future, if it continues to develop along this trajectory, could take on a very different shape than what a generation was once familiar with. What happens when a country is not only different in its perspectives, but also in its daily life experiences? As one looks at the changing streets of America, it gradually becomes clear that many cities may have entered a prolonged phase of restructuring, not out of desire, but because the old way of life seems no longer suitable. Once thriving centers due to bustling offices, crowded shops, and bustling crowds, these areas now face a different reality. Office buildings are empty from top to bottom, shopping malls are operating at a standstill, and housing prices are so high that they are pushing working residents away from the place they once called home. When those three factors intersect, the urban form cannot help but change. In many places, bold proposals have emerged, converting offices into affordable housing, redeveloping commercial areas into community spaces, or creating new, lower-density urban areas. However, the feasibility of these ideas depends heavily on policy, budget, and community consensus. Some cities have enough resources to experiment, but many struggle to maintain even the most basic functions, let alone reinvent themselves from the ground up. However, the most important problem of the urban future does not lie in architecture or planning. It's in human nature. No city can recover if the working and middle classes, the group that once kept the urban rhythm going, continue to leave. When they disappear, the neighborhood services, businesses, communities, and culture also thin out with them. And if this trend doesn't reverse, many urban centers, regardless of size or status, could resemble ghost towns for years to come. Not because they are completely abandoned, but because they lack the vitality that was once their core. The future of American cities will not be like the past. That is becoming increasingly clear. But whether that change will lead to a more cohesive society or a more deeply divided structure depends on how each community confronts this upheaval. If you've witnessed similar changes where you live, please share your story. Sometimes it's the small experiences of each individual that help paint the big picture of the entire country. Looking back at the entire journey of American cities today, from RVs cramped along roadsides, empty neighborhoods abandoned by residents, to sparse shopping malls and makeshift tents under skyscrapers, we realize this is not just a story about housing, but about the very soul of America. A nation once built on the belief that everyone has an opportunity, everyone has a stable home, and everyone has a place, now faces its most difficult question. What will keep us together as the stability that many generations have relied on gradually disappears? The future of those cities, and the future of America as a whole, depends on how we choose to view this truth, as a warning or as a new beginning. No one knows for sure what lies ahead, but one thing is clear. We are at a historic crossroads where every small decision made by each community, each family, and each individual can shape the face of America for decades to come. If even the streets that once represented prosperity are falling silent, and the rooftops that were the pride of a generation are turning into memories, can we still give our children and grandchildren an America as strong as the one our parents believed in? If you believe stories like this need to be seen and heard, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends who care. It's not about the video going viral, but about giving those small voices, sometimes overlooked in a vast country, the chance to reach someone, perhaps the person who needs to hear this the most. The content in this video is compiled from various public information sources and reputable statistical reports. All data used is for the purpose of analyzing social phenomena and is not intended to judge any individual, organization, or government. The video does not provide financial, legal, or policy advice. Viewers are encouraged to verify the information and consult multiple independent sources for a more complete perspective.